Today, our mission is step-by-step roadmap for mastering beginner English learning, a guide custom-tailored for the learner who needs confidence and, well, thorough knowledge fast.
It's an incredibly crucial focus, yeah. For anyone starting out, learning a global language like English can truly feel overwhelming. It often feels like standing at the base of this, huge, imposing mountain. Every step seems to involve navigating dense grammar rules or mastering a vast vocabulary and somehow making sense of rapidly spoken conversation.
And the pressure is real, isn't it? English isn't just a fun hobby for many people out there. It's often a necessary tool. It opens critical doors in international business, academic pursuits, global travel. The list goes on. But that fear of failure, that's often the first thing that trips people up, right?
Absolutely. And the core insight we've really pulled from these sources is vital here. The journey to fluency, it's fundamentally not about achieving immediate perfection. Not at all. It's really about maintaining relentless progress, focused practice, and maybe above all else, persistence. The most common challenges beginners face, that paralyzing fear of mistakes, the struggle with the speed of native speakers, the feeling of having a perpetually limited vocabulary, they're all solvable, but they definitely require a structured approach.
That fear is paralyzing. And that's exactly where we have to start right there. Okay, let's unpack this then. If that internal resistance is the very first hurdle, how do we even begin to build a resilient learner mindset?
Right. We have to begin with a complete psychological overhaul, essentially. If you approach every single learning session anticipating failure or embarrassment, well, you'll inevitably hesitate. You'll slow your own progress down. So the first major mindset shift is recognizing mistakes not as personal failures, but as necessary, structured learning opportunities.
Okay, that sounds great in theory, but, when you actually mess up a crucial sentence in a conversation, that immediate feeling is often shame, or maybe like a public setback. How does the brain actually benefit from that specific moment of error?
Yeah, it's a fair question. It's really all about memory encoding and neuroplasticity. When you attempt a sentence and realize it's incorrect, maybe because the other person looks confused or maybe you just caught yourself, your brain actively registers that conflict. It's learning very specifically what not to do the next time you try to communicate that same idea. Our sources really emphasize that even completely fluent native speakers make mistakes constantly, all the time. The difference is they don't let those errors stop the flow of communication. They might self-correct quickly or just move on instantly.
So if the mistake is basically a data point, then we need a system to collect that data. You mentioned this actionable exercise, the mistake journal. Can you elaborate a bit on the practical application? How does that work day to day?
The mistake journal is incredibly powerful, really, because it systematizes the error, makes it less emotional. It's quite simple, actually. Every time you speak or write in English and you become aware of an error, could be a wrong verb tense, a misplaced preposition, a mispronounced word, anything, you just log it. Write down the mistake itself, then write the correct version next to it. And then, crucially, review that list maybe once a week.
That review process sounds key. It turns that, emotional sting of making a mistake into a measurable data set you can actually work with.
It absolutely does. You start seeing patterns. Maybe you perpetually confuse for and since, for example, a classic one. And then you can focus your precious study time purely on correcting that specific structural issue. It validates that your brain is identifying patterns and improving. Plus, this method really helps confront that fear of judgment. Beginners often assume everyone's listening just to criticize their accent or grammar, but the reality is the vast majority of people genuinely appreciate the effort. They're focused on understanding your message, not on perfect delivery.
Right. Focusing on expression, not perfection. So our guide also suggests some practical confidence-building steps you can do alone without needing an audience.
Yes. And the immediate starting exercise is really simple. Just practice speaking aloud for maybe 5-10 minutes every day, even just to yourself, seriously. You could describe your immediate surroundings, narrate the steps you take to make coffee in the morning, or talk about your plans for the evening. The only rule, the non-negotiable part, is to just speak without judging yourself. It builds that crucial physical habit, the muscle memory required for forming English sentences quickly and more naturally.
And building on that internal practice, there's the power of visualization, which isn't just like wishful thinking, is it? It's more like mental rehearsal.
Precisely. Visualization actively trains your brain for confident, real-time application. You should actively imagine those real-life scenarios you'll face. Ordering a slightly complex meal, maybe, or introducing yourself to a new colleague, asking for directions at an airport. And as you visualize the scenario playing out successfully, you pair it with positive self-talk. Repeating affirmations like, I am learning every day, or mistakes actually help me improve, that anchors the confidence. It helps ensure you don't just freeze up when the real life situation actually happens. Hashtag 1.2, setting clear, trackable goals.
Okay, so once that psychological foundation feels a bit more solid, we need direction, right? Learning a language without measurable goals feels a bit like going on a long road trip without a map or a GPS. You might be driving, but you've no idea if you're getting closer to where you want to go.
That structure is absolutely vital for motivation, especially when progress inevitably, and it will, slow down at times. Our sources strongly recommend dividing your objectives into these 3 tiers. It helps maintain motivation and provides clear, escalating targets to aim for.
Okay, let's start with the base layer then. The short-term goals. The daily or weekly ones. These are the quick, achievable wins that build momentum, I guess.
Exactly. These should be almost impossible not to achieve to build that success habit. Examples could be learning and actively trying to use, say, 10 new words per day, or ensuring you complete 15 minutes of focused speaking practice daily, or maybe finishing one single online grammar lesson on a specific point you're stuck on. These small, successful achievements, they trigger the reward centers in your brain, reinforcing the habit, making you want to continue.
Right. Moving up the ladder then, what do the midterm goals look like? The monthly objectives, the ones that start showing some real functional competence emerging.
Yeah, this is where the output starts getting properly measurable. A midterm goal might be something like, hold a structured 5-minute conversation without panicking and switching back to my native language, or maybe write a short 3-paragraph essay on my favorite hobby. And a great input goal could be understanding a song you like, or maybe a short video clip, entirely without relying on subtitles. That shows you've successfully bridged the gap between just passively hearing and actively understanding.
And finally, the big ones, the aspirational long-term goals, the quarterly or maybe even yearly objectives.
That's the real payoff, where you see the life impact. A long-term goal is where you start thinking, okay, I can speak confidently enough now to handle my daily life tasks, or I can actually read an English book meant for native speakers. Or, and this is important for many professional learners, I can successfully participate in an English business discussion or meeting without feeling completely lost.
Yeah.
The mechanism that really links all 3 tiers together is tracking. You've got to track it. Use a simple journal, a checklist, maybe a dedicated tracking app, whatever works for you, to log your daily achievements, your word count, the lessons you've completed. That documentation validates every minute of effort you put in.
I think the biggest threat to achieving these goals isn't always the difficulty, is it? It's often just burnout. Doing too much, too fast. Hashtag 1.3, the power of consistency over intensity.
That's precisely why this next point, section 1.3, is so critical. Consistency has to win over intensity, every time. Learners often feel they need to cram, pulling these 5-hour marathon study sessions on a Sunday afternoon. But the research consistently shows that consistency, even a focused 30 to 45 minutes every single day, yields far more significant and, crucially, long-lasting progress.
Why is that smaller, consistent window more effective? From a learning standpoint, what's happening in the brain?
Well, it relates directly to how memory consolidation works. Your brain basically moves information from short-term to long-term memory while you sleep. If you cram for 5 hours straight, you completely overload your working memory. Honestly, much of that information just doesn't stick. It can't be processed effectively. But daily, consistent exposure, even in smaller chunks, allows your brain to process, consolidate, and internalize the material every single night. It reinforces those neural pathways necessary for language recall much more effectively.
Our sources even provide a kind of sample daily routine structure. One that integrates the necessary skills without demanding hours and hours of time.
Yeah, it's really about smart time allocation, not just brute force hours. Imagine a structure like this, for example. Maybe morning, 15 minutes. Quick vocabulary review using flashcards, maybe some light listening practice, like a simple news summary podcast, just to wake up the brain in English mode. Then afternoon, 20 minutes, dedicated to input skills, perhaps reading a graded text or writing a short journal entry about your day. Evening, 15 minutes. Purely focused on speaking practice. Could be self-talk, maybe some shadowing, or even a quick chat with an AI chatbot partner. And then just before bed, night, 10 minutes. A quick review and reflection, logging the day's achievements, maybe planning tomorrow's 10 new words. Breaking it up like that prevents fatigue and ensures constant, low-pressure exposure to all the necessary skill areas.
Okay, so we've got the right mental frame, we've got the structure for consistency. Now we need the actual raw material. Building a house requires bricks, right? And in English, vocabulary is definitely that essential building block. Now, here's where it gets really interesting. If a beginner has limited mental energy, limited time, where exactly should they focus their vocabulary efforts first? Tag 2.1, prioritizing core vocabulary.
The absolute priority has to be high-frequency words, period. A beginner shouldn't waste precious time trying to memorize niche, specialized terminology or rare, fancy adjectives. It's just inefficient. Studies consistently show that learning the 1,000 most common words in English, what some call the survival vocabulary, can allow you to understand up to 80% of everyday conversation. That's a huge return on investment.
Can you lay out some of those essential starting categories, the things we really need to nail down immediately?
Sure. You want to start with immediate functional necessities. Think basic greetings. Hello, how are you? Goodbye. The most common action verbs: go, come, make, say, eat, have, be, see. Essential adjectives: good, bad, happy, sad, big, small. And then basic functional groups like numbers, colors, days of the week, family terms, and common food items. These allow you to construct the simplest, most necessary sentences right away, which builds confidence.
A major and often painful error I see beginners make all the time is memorizing long lists of words just in isolation. They learn the word interesting, but they have no idea how to actually deploy it naturally in a sentence.
Ah, yes, the classic context is king rule. It's absolutely fundamental, and it's the difference between just knowing a word passively and being able to use it actively. You absolutely must learn words within sentences or specific, usable situations. Don't just memorize the verb eat. Memorize the complete phrase, I eat breakfast every morning. Instead of just the adjective interesting, pair it with its typical usage. This book is very interesting. This anchors the word to how it's actually used, its common partners or collocates, and its basic grammatical function in a sentence.
We definitely need tools to make sure these words stick long term, not just for the next test. Flashcards are a classic, but how do we maximize their retention power? Are some methods better than others?
Well, the real secret nowadays is using spaced repetition systems, or SRS. Traditional flashcards are fine, certainly better than nothing, but modern apps like Anki or Memrise, which use this SRS algorithm, are generally superior for long-term retention. Spaced repetition basically means the app tracks when you last successfully recalled a word, and then it forces you to review it again right before you're statistically likely to forget it. It optimizes your review time incredibly efficiently.
Yeah, that's definitely working smarter, not harder. Saves a lot of wasted effort reviewing things you already know well.
Exactly. And other great practical tools. Simple things like labeling objects around your home with their English names. That's pure, low-effort immersion happening all day long. Also, organizing your vocabulary thematically can be really helpful. Grouping words by topics like travel or clothing or household items rather than just random alphabetical lists. It helps your brain make connections.
So the specific vocabulary exercise recommended in our source material seems to combine all these elements for daily practice.
It does. It's quite straightforward. Pick maybe 5 new words daily, not too many. Write sentences using each of them real sentences you might actually say. And then, crucially, speak those sentences aloud 3 times. The writing engages your visual and analytical memory, and speaking them aloud engages the muscle memory, the physical aspect required for confident output later on. It hits multiple learning pathways. Tag 2.2, mastering listening comprehension.
Okay, moving from the building blocks, the vocabulary, to the input skills. Section 2.2 addresses what might be the beginner's greatest nemesis, mastering listening comprehension, especially when native speakers seem to talk at the speed of light.
Oh, it is definitely the single biggest hurdle for most learners, especially if your only exposure is, say, fast-paced movies or TV shows right from the start. When native speakers talk quickly, they naturally reduce syllables, they link words together, what linguists call connected speech, and they use idioms constantly. To a beginner, it can honestly just sound like one long, unintelligible stream of sound. So the non-negotiable solution, the starting point, has to be start slow and simple.
What are the necessary starting resources then? Where should someone actually begin?
You really need content specifically engineered for learners at first. Things like beginner-level podcasts. The sources mentioned examples like English Addict or ESL Pod. These use slower pacing, much clearer articulation, and deliberately simplified vocabulary. For video content, you absolutely should start with subtitles in your own language if needed initially. But here's the critical warning. Do not rely on those subtitles indefinitely. They very quickly turn listening into just a reading exercise. The goal has to be to gradually switch to English closed captions first, then maybe minimal keyword subtitles if available, and eventually remove them entirely to train your ear.
Right. This brings up that important distinction between just having passive background noise, like English radio playing all day, and active listening. You can be surrounded by the language, but if you're not actively engaging with it, the learning curve really flattens out, doesn't it?
Completely. Passive exposure can help a bit with recognizing the general sounds and rhythm of the language, sure, but active listening is where the real decoding happens, where you build comprehension. Our sources detail some specific active techniques. One really effective one is what we could call shadowing light. You listen to a short dialogue, maybe one sentence at a time. You pause the audio and you immediately repeat that sentence aloud. The focus here is on trying to match the speaker's rhythm and intonation as closely as possible.
That sounds like it directly helps bridge that gap between just understanding and eventually being able to speak with similar fluency later on. What else?
Another great technique is to pause a video or an audio clip every 30 to 60 seconds, and then try to summarize the content you just heard out loud in your own simple English words. This forces immediate recall and synthesis. It makes you process it. And of course, keep that notebook handy. Actively write down unknown words or phrases you hear. Don't stop the flow completely, just jot them down quickly and check their meaning later. This simple act shifts your brain from just passively absorbing sounds to actively decoding, questioning, and integrating the language. Consistent, active listening, even for just 20 minutes a day, will rapidly improve your comprehension skills.
Okay, we've established the foundation, the mindset, we've loaded up on the input skills, vocab, and listening. Now we have to turn all that fuel into actual movement. Speaking, maybe counterintuitively, is often cited as the absolute fastest path to improvement, even though it's usually the most anxiety-inducing step for learners.
Speaking is the ultimate stress test, isn't it? It requires real-time integration of everything. Vocabulary recall, grammar structure, pronunciation, intonation, all at once. And precisely because it forces that instant application, it accelerates the learning process exponentially. Things just click faster when you're forced to produce the language. Now, the most crucial technique for developing actual speaking fluency, specifically recommended across the sources, is shadowing, the full version.
Right, we mentioned shadowing light for listening practice,
Yeah.
but the full shadowing technique is much more intense, correct? How does that work exactly?
Yes, full shadowing is a potential game changer, particularly because it trains the physical speech muscles alongside the brain. You listen to a native speaker and you repeat immediately after them, almost simultaneously. You're often lagging by only a word or two behind them. The focus has to be incredibly intense. You are consciously trying to mimic everything. The speaker's pronunciation, the physical placement of their tongue and mouth, if you can see them, their rhythm, their stress patterns, their intonation contours. You're essentially training your mouth and your mind to work together in sync.
Wow, okay. That sounds like a really difficult synchronization task, especially for a beginner.
Yeah.
What's the recommended way to actually start with this demanding technique without getting discouraged?
You absolutely have to start small, very small. Choose a short audio clip, maybe just 30 to 60 seconds long to begin with, something clear. Listen to it maybe 3 times completely first, just for comprehension. Get the gist. Then play it again and start repeating aloud, maybe phrase by phrase at first, focusing intensely on mimicking the speaker perfectly. Repeat that same clip over and over until you can keep up reasonably well. The goal is then to gradually increase the length of the clip as the physical mechanism of speaking English becomes more comfortable and automatic.
Okay, but what if I don't have a practice partner readily available or a specific audio clip handy right at that moment? How can I build that necessary mental speed and speaking habit on my own?
That's exactly where developing internal fluency through constant self-talk becomes absolutely vital. Use English internally to narrate your day. Describe the queue at the supermarket in your head. Talk about your thoughts and emotions regarding something. Plan your evening out loud to yourself. This dramatically reduces that hesitation time, that awful lag between having a thought and actually getting the words out, and it prepares your mental circuitry for smoother, real-time conversation later.
The sources also really emphasize real-life role-playing. Why is actually simulating specific conversations so much more effective than just practicing isolated sentences?
It's vital preparation because it significantly reduces the cognitive load when you're in those high-stress real-world situations. You should actively practice specific dialogues for situations you know you are likely to encounter. Rehearse ordering food, making it a bit complex. Yes, I would like the chicken sandwich, please, but could I have it without onions? And maybe with extra cheese? And a cup of black tea, please. Practice asking for directions clearly. Excuse me, I'm sorry to bother you, but I am looking for the nearest train station. Is it far from here? Which way should I go? You internalize those necessary phrases as ready-made functional blocks, almost like chunks of language, ready for instant deployment when you need them.
And in today's learning environment, these safe practice tools are a huge advantage, aren't they? Things that weren't available even a few years ago.
Oh, completely. They eliminate that fear of judgment almost entirely, which is huge. You should definitely utilize AI chatbots like ChatGPT or even more specialized language tutoring bots for dynamic, instantaneous conversation practice. You can set the parameters yourself. Okay, act as a friendly barista in a coffee shop, or you are a librarian helping me find a book. And you get real-time feedback on your grammar, your phrasing, your word choice, without worrying about embarrassing yourself in front of a human partner. Also, never ever underestimate the simple power of self-correction. Just record your own voice while you're reading something aloud or doing one of these role plays. Listening back is often the fastest, most objective way to identify awkward phrasing you didn't notice or those persistent pronunciation mistakes you keep making. Hashtag tag 3.2 reinforcing skills through reading and writing.
Right, so if speaking is the fastest track to fluency, then reading and writing are like the essential reinforcement activities. They solidify the structure and help things stick in your memory.
Exactly, they provide the stability and the depth. For reading, beginners absolutely need a clear progression path. You simply cannot start with a complex newspaper article or a dense novel. You must start with what are called graded texts or graded readers.
Okay, just for our listener, what exactly is a graded text or reader?
Good question. A graded reader is basically a piece of literature, often a simplified version of a classic story, or an original story that's been specifically written or adapted using a controlled vocabulary and grammar range. It's tailored for non-native speakers at a specific learning level, like A1, A2, B1, etc. Start there. Then you can gradually move on to maybe children's books, which often use surprisingly useful everyday language, short online articles on simple, familiar topics, or even just reading reliable subtitles while watching something.
What's the recommended daily reading exercise then to really maximize retention and learning from it?
The key is active engagement. Read aloud daily if possible. Reading aloud connects the eye, the voice, and the brain, which dramatically improves memory retention compared to silent reading. While you're reading, maybe underline unknown words. And this is important, force yourself to try and guess the meaning from the surrounding context first, before you reach for the dictionary. Only after you've finished a section or the whole text should you maybe write a very short 1 to 2 sentence summary of each paragraph or section you read. This guarantees active comprehension. It proves you weren't just passively scanning the words.
And writing. How should a beginner approach that?
Yeah.
It often feels so overwhelming with all the grammar rules and spelling.
Again, start small, really small. Writing reinforces structure and vocabulary retention beautifully, but you need achievable goals. Begin with simple daily journal entries, like extremely simple observations. Today I went to the market. It was busy. I bought apples and bread. Later I saw a big dog in the park. That's perfect. Then you can progress gradually to writing short emails or messages to a friend or language partner, and then maybe move on to short essays, maybe just a few paragraphs on familiar, comfortable topics like your hobbies or your hometown.
When should a beginner start relying on correction tools like Grammarly or maybe the checker in Microsoft Word? Is there a right way to use them?
Yes, use them wisely. They are excellent tools for checking your work afterwards and, importantly, for identifying recurring patterns of error you might not notice yourself. However, the crucial rule is this. Write the first draft entirely on your own, using only the knowledge you currently possess. Get your thoughts down on the page first. Once that initial thought is expressed, then use the tools for correction and suggestions. This builds your confidence that you can communicate the idea, and the correction then serves as a targeted learning tool, not as a crutch you depend on from the start. You know, what's fascinating here is grammar. It's so often the thing that becomes this huge psychological roadblock for learners. Beginners often feel they absolutely must master every single obscure grammatical rule before they dare to open their mouths, which of course just leads to freezing up. Our goal really must be functional grammar. Grammar for communication, not grammar for perfection's sake. Hashtag 4.1, functional grammar over perfection.
Right. Grammar should serve communication, not dominate it and cause anxiety. So if I'm a beginner, what are the absolute core functional areas of grammar I need to master immediately just to be comprehensible, just to get my meaning across?
Okay, you need to focus relentlessly on the fundamental architecture of the English sentence. That means the basic sentence structure. Subject plus verb plus object. AJ, I like coffee. Get that solid. Then you absolutely need to master the 3 essential tenses that allow you to locate an action in time. The simple present for routines, facts, the simple past for completed actions, and the simple future, often using will or be going to for plans. And finally, you need to be able to confidently form simple questions like, do you like coffee? And negatives like, I do not like coffee. Honestly, if you can reliably manage these core elements, you can communicate almost anything functionally, even if it's not perfectly nuanced yet.
Okay, let's get ultra practical again. Say I'm really struggling with the tenses mixing up past and present all the time. What's a specific practice solution I could try?
A great exercise is to take a simple, high-frequency verb like work or eat or drive, and then consciously practice describing actions using all three basic senses every day. For example, I drive to work every day. That's your present routine. Yesterday, I drove to the store. That's a completed past action. Tomorrow, I will drive to my friend's house. That's a future plan. Doing this consistently forces you to focus on the verb conjugation changes and the necessary time markers. Every day, yesterday, tomorrow. Now, if you're struggling more with word order, maybe putting adjectives in the wrong place or mixing up questions, the best solution is often just reading simple, correct sentences aloud frequently. It helps you internalize the natural flow and rhythm of English structure.
And what about those notoriously confusing little words, the articles a, and the? They trip up even advanced learners sometimes.
Oh, absolutely. My advice here is don't try to intellectualize all the complex rules first, especially not as a beginner. That can take ages and be really demotivating. Instead, focus on internalizing common, fixed phrases and examples. Learn a cat, an apple, the book, the sun. When you learn a new countable noun, try to learn it with its correct article, usually a or an for singular generics, right from the start. This helps build an intuitive feel for usage before you try to memorize all the complex rules about count versus non-count nouns, specific versus general reference, and all that. Learn by example first. Hashtag 4.2, focusing on clarity and intonation.
Okay, so functional grammar gets the structure of the message right. Pronunciation, similarly you're saying, is primarily about achieving clarity.
Clarity is absolutely the single most important metric. It's far, far more important than trying to achieve some kind of perfect native-like accent, which doesn't really exist anyway. Think about it. Native English speakers themselves have hundreds of different accents globally. British, American, Australian, Irish, Indian, South African. The list is huge. You just need to focus on being clearly understood. A listener might actually struggle more with poor rhythm and incorrect word stress than they would with a slight regional lilt or accent.
Makes sense. So what are some practical, maybe even mechanical tips to improve pronunciation clarity for an English beginner?
Well, the techniques really involve intensive listening and deliberate repetition. We mentioned shadowing before. Use that technique specifically to copy the stress patterns and the intonation contours, the music, of native speech. English is what's called a stress-timed language. That means the stress falls heavily on the important content words like nouns, main verbs, adjectives, adverbs, while the function words like articles, prepositions, auxiliary verbs are often reduced and unstressed. If you stress the wrong syllable in a word or stress the wrong words in a sentence, it can genuinely become unintelligible to a native listener, even if the individual sounds are okay. Also, you might need to target specific English sounds that are notoriously difficult because they might not exist in your native language. The aliso sounds, both voiced like in the b and unvoiced like in think, are classic examples. The difference between ship and sheep, or live and leave, these need dedicated practice. Use minimal pair drills, listening and repeating words that differ by only one sound, and even simple tongue twisters like, she sells seashells by the seashore. They might seem silly, but they actually train your mouth muscles, your tongue, your lips, to quickly transition between challenging sound combinations. These mechanical exercises build your physical articulation ability, which is just as important as knowing the vocabulary. Hashtag 4.3, leveraging modern technology.
And we can't ignore the tools. Technology today makes learning faster, more adaptive, and definitely more personalized than ever before. We absolutely have to leverage these resources.
Technology is pretty much indispensable now, I'd agree. You really need to leverage it for consistent exposure, targeted practice, and instant feedback. Use the popular language learning apps like Duolingo or Babbel for that initial gamification, building daily habits and getting basic vocabulary and sentence structure down. Then maybe switch to something like Anki when you need more personalized, intense vocabulary retention through spaced repetition for words you choose.
And how should a beginner best utilize those incredibly powerful AI chatbots we talked about earlier?
They offer dynamic conversation practice that goes far beyond traditional textbook exercises or even basic apps. You can literally tell the AI, okay, I want to practice ordering tickets for a concert. Please role-play the ticket agent for me. The AI then forces you into a specific, realistic, high-frequency dialogue scenario. And crucially, it can provide instant correction and suggestions on your grammar, your phrasing, your word choice in a low-stakes environment. And don't forget YouTube. Use specific channels that offer focused lessons on pronunciation points you struggle with, tricky grammar areas, or vocabulary related to your interests or needs. There's so much high-quality free material out there now.
The integration exercise mentioned here seems essential, though it's not just about installing the app, it's about actually using the tool consistently.
Absolutely. You need to actively dedicate maybe 15 focused minutes every single day specifically to using one of these language apps or an AI tool for practice. This effectively supplements your reading and speaking practice with high-quality, targeted input and interaction, often without requiring the significant time commitment or cost of finding a human tutor for daily sessions. Right, so if we try and connect all this back to the bigger picture, the ultimate objective for most learners isn't just passing a test, right? It's moving beyond that conscious, clunky translation process in your head and achieving a more natural, almost effortless fluency. And that really only happens through sustained immersion, deliberately surrounding yourself daily with the language, transforming it from just the subject you study into a medium you actually live within, at least partly. Hashtag 5.1 techniques for total immersion.
That term total immersion can sound pretty intense, maybe even intimidating. But what are some actionable, maybe lower effort immersion techniques a beginner can realistically apply starting today?
Okay, start immediately with the low-hanging fruit. Change your phone's language setting to English. Change your social media interface settings to English. Force your daily technology interactions to happen in the target language. It's passive exposure, but it adds up. Then, consciously force yourself to think in English during a mundane routine activities. Narrate your trip to the grocery store in your head. Describe the flavor of your coffee to yourself. List your tasks for the day internally, all in simple English. It feels weird at first, but it builds the habit. And continue labeling objects around the house, sure, but maybe elevate it slightly. Instead of just writing chair on a sticky note, use a complete sentence like, "This is my favorite blue chair," or "I sit here to read." These small, constant exposures help build that direct, natural connection between the concept or object and the English word for it, crucially bypassing that slow translation step from your native language. Hashtag 5.2, sustaining motivation and overcoming plateaus.
Now, in the long game of language learning, plateaus are pretty much inevitable, aren't they? You hit that frustrating stage where progress seems to slow right down, maybe even stall. And that frustration often kills motivation stone dead. How do we sustain effort during those difficult times?
You absolutely must be prepared for the plateau effect. Expect it. Progress is very rarely a smooth, linear, upward curve. It often happens in spurts, followed by periods where it feels like nothing's changing. To stay motivated during those times, you might need to shift your focus. Instead of just looking at massive, distant goals like become fluent, start tracking smaller, more consistent wins. Log the number of new sentences you successfully spoke without hesitation today, or maybe that tricky grammar concept you finally feel you understand. Celebrate the small victories. And definitely reward yourself for consistent daily practice. If you manage to maintain your 45 minutes of practice every day for a whole week, give yourself some kind of non-language related reward you'll actually enjoy. Critically, you also need to mix in enjoyable activities. Use English songs you love, play video games in English, watch movies or TV shows you find genuinely entertaining, even with subtitles initially. When the learning process feels fun, or at least partly fun, it ceases to feel purely like hard work or a chore. And that is absolutely essential for overcoming those inevitable motivation dips and sticking with it long term. Hashtag 5.3 common beginner traps.
Okay, before we wrap things up, let's quickly identify and maybe dismantle the three most common traps that tend to derail beginner learners, the things that cause people to give up.
Right. The first big trap is often pacing problems when speaking. This usually means one of two things. Either speaking way too slowly out of crippling hesitation and fear of mistakes, or paradoxically, speaking way too fast because of nervousness, which just makes you sound rushed, unclear, and potentially garbled. The solution for both is really to use audio examples. Listen to how native speakers pace themselves naturally and practice things like the shadowing technique we discussed. This helps you internalize a more natural conversational rhythm and maintain a steady, clear speed.
Okay, and the second trap, the one that causes so many learners to just freeze up mid-sentence.
That would be overthinking grammar. Constantly. Beginners often get completely bogged down in real time, trying desperately to recall some obscure grammar rule they learned last week. It paralyzes them. This causes them to halt the conversation, lose their train of thought, and feel embarrassed. The solution here really has to be prioritize clear communication first. If the listener basically understands your meaning, even if the grammar wasn't perfect, count it as a success, especially early on. Communication, not grammatical perfection, has to be the primary goal. You can refine the grammar later.
And the third one, perhaps the most challenging habit to break. The one that can slow down even intermediate or advanced learners if they don't address it.
That has to be the translation habit, where you are constantly mentally translating everything word for word from your native language into English before you speak or write, and maybe translating back again when you listen. This is a massive mental slowdown. It completely kills any chance of real fluency because your brain is doing double the work. You must actively work to break this habit. Force yourself to think directly in English through things like journaling, self-talk, and aggressive active listening practice. When you hear the English word apple, force your brain to immediately visualize the actual red or green fruit, not just translate the sound back into your native language's word for it. It takes conscious effort.
So what does this all mean, really? It sounds like success isn't so much about having some kind of innate natural talent for languages. It's much more about strategically shifting your daily habits, being consistent, and consciously training your mental circuits for maximum efficiency.
Exactly. The journey definitely demands dedication, and it demands a smart strategy. But every single day that you focus on consistency, on learning words in context, on prioritizing clear communication over perfection, and on embracing those mistakes as learning tools, you are actively building towards that goal of more effortless fluency.
This has been a deeply practical, really comprehensive look at the starting line for English fluency. Let's just quickly recap the core strategies we've covered for everyone listening. First, secure that positive mindset and learn to embrace mistakes as necessary steps. Second, set clear, tiered, trackable goals. Third, prioritize high-frequency vocabulary and learn it within context. Fourth, utilize active listening and intensive shadowing techniques for input and output practice. And fifth, focus on functional grammar for communication, not abstract perfection.
And please remember this crucial point. Every single expert speaker you admire was once a complete beginner, struggling with exactly the same fears and frustrations you might be feeling now. Progress truly comes from consistent, daily, reasonably high-quality practice, little by little.
Okay, before we leave you to maybe start planning your new study routine based on all this, we talked quite a bit about tracking progress, which raises an important final question for you to think about. If the ultimate goal is truly functional fluency in daily life, real-world success, how might tracking communication success itself, things like, hey, I successfully ordered a complex meal without any help today, or, wow, I actually understood a full, unscripted native conversation for 5 minutes. How might tracking those kinds of victories be a significantly more motivating metric for a beginner than simply tracking the raw number of words learned or grammar exercises completed?
That's a great point to end on. Focusing on those tangible, real-world functional victories, it validates the entire effort in a much more meaningful way. It confirms that the system, the practice, is actually working in the way you need it to. It shifts your internal metric from just academic achievement, counting words, to genuine personal empowerment and capability in the real world. It becomes about function over pure form. And I suspect that is ultimately what sustains motivation for the long, challenging game of language acquisition.
A perfect thought to leave our learners with as they embark on or continue their English journey.